Taji, and welcome to another episode of Métis Time Capsule. You're with your host, of course, Alexandria Anthony. And before we get into today's segment, I want to really express how it's so very crucial and important that we Métis people tell our stories. I know a lot of Indigenous Métis stories, events, and history have been told by colonial institutions or have that colonial twist to it. So we really have got to take back our Métis culture, heritage, languages, and retell our own stories for our future generations. Um, they are our hopes and dreams. And today's segment is really what happened after the victory of Frog Plain, the Battle of Seven Oaks. There were mysterious, even violent deaths that occurred after. But before we get right into that, folks, the Battle of Seven Oaks, or how I like to portray it, the victory of Frog Plain, took place June 19, 1816. And really, this battle was a culmination of the Pemmican Wars and the escalating fur trade disputes between, of course, the Hudson Bay Company, HBC, and the Northwest Company, the NWC. And pemmican was the food supply that the fur traders depended on to carry out operations. And March 1816, the Hudson Bay Company seized and then destroyed the Northwest Company's Fort Gibraltar at the forks of the Assiniboine and Red Rivers. And the fort had been built in 1810 by Cuthbert Grant Jr.'s brother-in-law, John Wills. And the real goal of this maneuver was to prevent the Northwest Company from transshipping pemmican from the forks to their brigades coming in from Fort William on Lake Superior. And on June 19, 1816, a party of Métis freighters led by Cuthbert Grant Jr. were heading west of the Forks to deliver pemmican to the Northwest Canoe Brigades on Lake Winnipeg. And it's also interesting to note that Cuthbert Grant Jr. later explained that the Métis were highly successful in defeating Semple because after the first round of fire, the Métis in general, they threw themselves on their backs whilst loading, whereupon the colonists, conceiving that many were killed, took off their hats and hustled. And Semple's men were then taken by sheer surprise. Of course, you'd be taken by surprise when the Métis, having reloaded, rose from the grass and began to resume firing. And the fact that they threw themselves down to reload is mentioned in several other dispositions as the reason why many fewer of their men were killed. And after the battle, of course, Cuthbert Grant Jr. seized Fort Douglas, and the Selkirk settlers and the Hudson Bay staff left for Norway House. So really, to put this into perspective, folks, and the battle Sevenoaks, the victory of Frog Plain, was really one of the first times, and this is so very, very important in telling our Métis story. It was one of the first times that the Métis asserted themselves as the new nation with rights to trade as they wished and travel freely on their own land. So that's very, very important. And really, what Lord Selkirk attempted to do was to establish an agricultural colony at Red River, of course, in Manitoba, Canada, which, of course, was indeed a real threat to the Métis traditional way of life. And of course, as we've mentioned, negotiations um, over the pemmican supply failed. And picture this in your mind, and if you sort of backtrack in history, June 19, 1816, 65 men accompanied Cuthbert Grant Jr. during the battle, the victory at Frog Plain, otherwise known as the Battle of Sevenoaks. Of this number, only 16-year-old Joseph Letendre was killed, and Joseph Trottier was wounded. Governor Semple and 20 of his men were killed. And again, it was the Métis, the Northwest Fur Company, against the HBC, of course, and Governor or Robert Semple. And here we get into the crust of our episode, and here is a quote. It is a saying up in that country that 26 out of the 65 died violent deaths. The record valuable as indicating the nature and perils of the lives the hunters and half-breeds led. End of quote. And this is from On Canada's Frontier by Julian Ralph, 1892. And also, it's made reference of in Red River by Joseph Hargrave in 1871. And as we've said, in the years following the victory of Frog Plain, the Battle of Sevenoaks, 26 Métis and Indians suffered a variety of strange, savage, and often violent deaths. Very, very mysterious. And here we have number one, Francois Deschamps Sr. crossing the river near his house at Pembina, suddenly dropped dead on the ice. And at this very same moment, his dog did the same. Number two, Francois Deschamps was stabbed to death by his own comrade, his wife shot, his children burnt to death, all at the same time near Fort Union in the Missouri River. Then we have number three, La Grosse Tête, meaning big head. The brother of Francois Deschamps was shot by an Indian between the pickets of the trading post on the Missouri. Number four, Coutonus suddenly dropped dead at a dance with a party of his comrades at the Grand Forks beyond Pembina. Number 5, Batoche was shot by an unknown person in the Red River colony. Number 6, Augustine Lavalin mysteriously drowned in Red River near Netley Creek. Number 7 is Alexander Fraser, a French officer who was at the time in Paris, and a French officer ran through his body, of course, with a sword, and he died. Number 8 is Baptiste Morel. While drunk, can you just imagine this horrific scene? While drunk, he was thrown in a fire by his own drunken companions and literally burnt to death. Number 9 is Louis Lesert. He died drunk on the high road on Missouri River. Number 10, Joseph Trottier, wounded by the bursting of his own gun, and he was disabled for life. 11, we have J. Baptiste Letendre. He died in utter anguish, utter misery by infection. Number 12, we have Duplessis, killed by a wooden pitchfork that went through his body as he jumped from a haystack at Carleton, Saskatchewan River. Number 13, J. Baptiste Parizin, shot dead by persons unknown while on a buffalo hunt on the Pembina Plains. Number 14, we have Toussaint Vendre, lost his arm in carelessness. Number 15, we have Francois Garpy, also known as the Brave, and here where it gets again horrific. He was shot, scalped by Sioux Indians on the banks of the Missouri in front of his comrades. Number 16 was Bourassa, killed in Saskatchewan. There was no further details that could be uncovered. Number 17, Louison Valley, shot and again scalped by Sioux Indians. Number 18, we have Ignacia McKay, who was literally found dead on the road near Whitehorse Plains. Number 19, we have Michel Martin, died again a very miserable death in complete agony of disease in Montreal. Number 20, we have Thomas McKay, died in Temperance in Columbia River. So these are quite horrific, mysterious, savage, violent deaths. And we have number 21, Katiti Goose, of course, who is an Indian, on returning to his family after, of course, the victory of Frog Plain, was met by a war party at the Gros Ventres, or Big Belly tribe, near Brandon House. And after shooting and savagely scalping him, they cut his body in pieces, carried off his fingers and toes, and strewed the rest of his body to the wild beasts to mark the place where he fell. So literally, folks, he was scalped and cut to pieces. Number 22, we have Chinese Easton, of course an Indian, drowned in a small pool of water that was scarcely 2 feet deep near Brandon House. Number 23, we have Oku Matan, of course, an Indian, froze to death on Pemina Plains. And this is where, where mysterious comes to play, because we know that First Nation people certainly would know how to prevent themselves from freezing to death on anywhere. They were well versed in trying, surviving in these particular temperatures. So very mysterious indeed. Number 24 is Needy Goose Ubi Wan was gored, savagely gored to death by a buffalo bull while hunting. Number 25, we have Pimi Cantos was shot and thrown in a hole by his own people. Number 26, of course, is Wagitani. His wife and 2 children were killed by lightning on a hunting trip. So here you have, folks, 26 mysterious, violent, savage deaths after the victory of Frog Plain. And it really makes you wonder the various circumstances that these individuals met their demise, and what was really going on behind the scenes. And these are the detail, all the details that we have to be able to determine what really happened. And of these numbers, 2 were Canadian, 2 were English, 2 were Scottish, 2 were Cree, 4 were Soto, and 14 were French half-breeds. And here really where it perplexes me, and how again it's very important for Métis people to be involved in telling their stories, opposed to the colonial slant on our history, our culture, and our legends and our stories. 1816 to 1891 was 75 years. So just keep that number in mind, and I'm going to read something more to pertaining to an account in regards to the victory of Frog Plain. And this is really, some of you may or may not know that a number of Indians under Chief Peguis were camped on the east side of the river, and they took no part in the troubles. But it's shocking to me, and it sort of perplexes me, their sympathies were plainly with the colonists. And they went out the morning after the engagement, which is the victory of Frog Plain, and brought in the bodies of the killed, or as many as could be found. Several eyewitnesses have said that bodies were concealed in the heavy brush in the vicinity, as wounded men had crawled into thickets and later died there. And a Mrs. Kaufman had said, she died in 1892. She had lived in Kildonan East, and she informed or made an account that she saw the Indians bring in the dead bodies to Fort Douglas with carts, and that Governor Semple and the doctor were buried in board coffins, and the others were wrapped in blankets, and the whole number being interred in a grove of trees on the south side of the creek, southwest of the fort, and quite near the spot where there were at that time the residence of the ex-mayor, Mayor Logan. And she also accounted that the body of one man was naked, and the clothes had been stolen before the Indians found it. And a Mr. Donald Murray also made an account that when the burial place, Chief Peguis stood nearby with tears streaming down his face, and he repeatedly expressed his sorrow at the sad occurrences taking place. And of course, Donald Murray had stated that positively that all these bodies were removed some years after to St. John's Church um, graveyard, and he was not able to locate the site of the reinterment. And he remembers distinctly that on the morning the settlers handed over the fort to the Métis, all the ammunition for the cannons were carried down to the river and thrown into the water from the end of a boat moored in the stream. And that sort of brings a personal account to me, because I know for many, many years I lived very, very close to the site of the Victory of Frog Plain. I would walk there every day and sort of sit, contemplate in regards to Cuthbert Grant Jr., the Métis, the struggles, what they went through, where this um, time in history where really asserting yourself, the first time the Métis were asserting themselves as a new nation, fighting for their rights for the pemmican, fighting for their rights to be able to freely travel and hunt on their own land. So it's a very pivotal point in Métis history. And I would have an old lady at the time, she must have been close to 90 years old, mention to me that as a child she could remember picking up bullets, bullet casings from the site of the Battle of Seven Oaks, and I thought it was. I wish I could have had one of those, and that was a child. I don't know whatever happened to those casings, but I think it was be very, very important, a historical artifact to have. And getting back to the years I just previously mentioned, 1816 to 1891, 75 years, folks. And it's shocking to me, but not shocking for the colonial standpoint, but shocking to me that it took 75 bloody years to build a monument on the site. 75 years. And in 1891, Mary Inkster donated a piece of her land along Main Street to build, of course, the monument to the Battle of Seven Oaks. And that's again perplexes me, folks, on it taking 75 years for people to just think that an important battle took place. And I was quite privileged myself in 2015 to be asked to sit on a committee in regards to the revitalization of the Victory of Frog Plain Battle of Seven Oaks site. Parks Canada, various other agencies were involved, and they thought it was relevant, being a descendant of Cuthbert Grant Jr., that I should be involved in the planning stages on the 200th anniversary. And again, I have another question to ponder, to put it out there, folks, is it took 75 years to put a colonial monument up. And how many years later for the Métis, or the Manitoba Métis Federation, or even at that time the Métis National Council, to put anything up or to put anything in the works to remember this pivotal, significant time in Métis history? That boggles my mind, and that's something that maybe we'll never have an answer to. So again, um, the shocking, mysterious deaths that occurred after the Victory of Frog Plain, the Battle of Seven Oaks, where we had 26 individuals. And the details that were relayed in this episode were the details that all that were made on record. And I'll end this segment again with this quote, and I quote, "It is a saying up in that country that 26 out of the 65 died violent deaths. The record valuable as indicating the nature and perils of the lives the hunters and half-breeds led." End of quote. Again from Canada's Frontier by Julian Ralph, 1892. And I invite everybody, if you make it to Winnipeg and you get a chance to visit the revitalized site of the victory of Frog Plain, the Battle of Seven Oaks, where it was a key, pivotal point in Métis history, where it was the assertion of a new nation. And again, thank you for your support. Thank you for your listening. Take care, and remember, our Métis stories need to be told by Métis people. Thank you.